A very warm welcome to you, Sabine Schroeder. We have worked very closely together in the field of psychotherapy and with projects together and with groups of clients together. And just a little introduction around, you've got a postgraduate diploma in psychology and you have worked in the Eastern wellness traditions, namely Buddhism. And in reading through your bio and looking at your website, one of the things that really stood out to me is around your passion and the fact that you said this work has chosen you. So welcome, and I'd like to start with you thinking a little about that.
Thank you, Nikki. First and foremost, I want to express my gratitude for being invited to participate in this. I think it's just beautiful what you're offering. And my intention today is to share some of my own learnings through the work that I've done with my clients over the last 16 years. And I really believe clients teach us and impact us as much as we hopefully teach them and have a positive impact on them. So I also want to really acknowledge that and give gratitude to all the clients from past, present and hopefully future, and everything they teach us. It's such tender work. I'm sure you'll agree. It's really privileged tender work that we do. And so, yeah, my intention is to share something that's useful. And I also I bring my own personal lived experience of living with to this very moment and managing anxiety and what I've learned. So I'd like to just also share some of my own learnings.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and in regards to the work choosing me, I just look back about the path, you know, the path that I started off on a very different path, more medical model, as a physiotherapist, and it was my first psych unit that really grabbed me, and it literally, it feels like it does. It feels like it grabbed my body, and my body started vibrating and resonating, and I sat up, and this excitement rushed up into my heart, and I just felt, this is it. And then I switched over to psychology, and even within psychology, I knew, really looking back from the beginning, you know, attachment theory and different theories that now really underpin my work, and I had that same feeling, this is the work. And so eventually I also moved away from psychology into psychotherapy, and I just want to spend a moment explaining that psychology tends to align itself a lot more with a medical model, and that has its worth and it has its place. And I've certainly worked in a very clinical medical model and gradually moved away into something that's, I believe, really reconnecting with the very roots of psychology, which actually, psychology actually means study of the soul. And I believe the soul has been lost in many ways in psychology. And so I went and searched for that, and that's why psychotherapy, which I feel is larger in terms of what it encompasses and goes deeper, and it's much more relational, and that was really the fit for me. And it just feels comfortable in my body, and it feels the right place to be, and I bring great joy to my work, and my work rewards me with great meaning. So that's how I feel it's found me, and I feel blessed.
Lovely.
Yeah. So I want to just say a little bit about anxiety. Anxiety, the World Health Organization has stated, you know, over the years and currently, that they see anxiety in the Western world as being the #1 health issue. And I think that's a huge thing to consider, actually. The statistics vary, but sort of on average, they tell us that 1 in 3 people at some stage of their life will experience anxiety. Now, the way psychologists and psychiatrists clinically define anxiety, I'm not going to go into today. Anxiety disorders are certainly what they call a mood disorder, and that's something that can be diagnosed, and there are also different types. But today I want to speak more generally to the feeling, you know, anxiety that can come and arise and often stay around, and also at what point I want to address at what point it may be worthwhile actually seeking professional support, be it as a counsellor, well-trained counsellor, psychotherapist, psychologist, social worker, whatever you know you gravitate towards, to assist you in managing that if you feel you're really not able to manage that. But today I want to just talk more generally about a very common experience. Okay. So what I noticed in my own life, and what I continually notice in my clients, is that they actually experience anxiety and have experienced anxiety for many, many, many years of their life, and they've been unaware of it for a number of reasons. One is because we all learn to adapt to things, and we learn to manage things in certain ways. One way, for instance, that a lot of people learn to manage anxiety is by anxiety can be described as a kind of state of chaos and feeling out of control. And so often what we do is we overcompensate. That noise are just a lot of beautiful 28s outside feasting on the native trees. So I wonder if you can hear that. They have something to say. So often when things feel really out of control, just spend a moment thinking about what do you do? You know, what do you do if things feel really chaotic and move out of control? And what a lot of people do is they then try and control things even more. So they might become great list writers and really organise everything in advance, and organise themselves and their kids and their husbands and lots of other people and things in the workplace. And it can then often move into what we call, or what one model calls, a kind of rigidity. So then there are certain things in life. One of them is having children. Another one is if health is compromised in some way, and those old ways of managing are suddenly undermined. So for instance, you know, having children and entering into parenthood, that can really undermine old ways of doing things. And that's often when we find anxiety actually showing itself. And that's what I've certainly noticed in my own life, and I work a lot, particularly with parents, actually, around that. So the other key thing I just want to start off talking about foundationally is, and it's actually a reflective moment that I'd like to offer, and invite you, Nikki, and your people watching out there to engage in, and that's just reflecting for a moment. How do I feel about the anxiety that I experience in my life? How do I feel about it? Is it something I push away? Is it something I don't like? Is it something I battle and combat?
Yeah, generally my first instinct is, I want to push it away.
Yeah. And is it something I try and change? Is it something I try and ignore? Is it something I busy myself through? Is it something I've learned to really accept and work with? Is it something that I've been completely unaware with, and all of a sudden it's just came and, you know, swept through my life? So just spend a moment. Even I noticed your body, Nikki, kind of retracting and your hands pushing away. So your body, you know, gave me that message before your words did.
Yeah.
And that's a really good place to start. in my experience. This is a good place to start. What's your relationship like with this thing, with this experience, with this visitor called anxiety? Is it welcome? Is it unwelcome? Is it an enemy? Is it a pain? Yeah. So for me, I guess I reflecting in my own life, I think I spent much of my life ignoring it, parting through it, distracting myself from it. One key giveaway was I really could never be by myself. I always had to surround myself with people. And it was really once I started traveling by myself that it just bang, hit me like a ton of bricks. And then other phases and stages in my life where I wasn't able to manage it in a lot of ways, like parenthood, for instance, periods of chronic unwellness, physical unwellness. So often we're faced with moments where our usual patterns of avoidance or escaping or managing it are undermined. And that's often how it shows up. And that can feel quite frightening and very, very confronting. So I do want to start with that. Okay, so I've drawn this model and I'd like to share it with you. It's a model of what I call, well, I don't call it, I'm borrowing it from the people that have designed this model before me. And it's a model of what we call emotional intelligence. And, you know, for a long time in the contemplative traditions like Buddhism, we've been advised that actually emotions are really not the problem. And in fact, our thoughts are really not the problem. They're not the problem because they come, they arise, they abide, and they subside, like a wave, basically. And a really helpful role to play as us as hosts is just to actually observe them and look at them. And that's really the essence of how we relate to. And problems occur, particularly around managing anxiety, in terms of how we relate to our feelings and how we relate to anxiety. So I've drawn here, what you can see here is like a continuum. And there are two polarities, there are two extremes. And on this end, you know, this is one way we can deal with feelings and we can deal with our anxiety. We can dismiss it, we can ignore it, we can push it away, we can constantly busy ourselves through it, like in a chronic kind of way. We can distract ourselves, we can suppress it, yeah, and it's a constant pushing away. On the other end of the continuum, the other polarity is that we completely over-identify with the feeling, with the mood state like anxiety. And there's a kind of collapsing into, and often I call that a spiraling into. In fact, I had a gorgeous 14-year-old client who said, Sabine, it's like when I have these states of anxiety, it's like, you know, when you take the plug out of the bathtub and I get sucked into it. And it's such a great description. And that's also, both those extremes are really unhelpful and they actually exacerbate our experiences of anxiety. And so what we have, Buddhists have for a very long time, since the beginning of Buddha's enlightenment, said, you know, choose the middle path, avoid extremes. In the middle is where the balance is. And so here in the middle is a way that we can engage and relate to our anxiety and our feelings in general in a way that's much more skillful and much more effective and much more helpful. And this is really backed up by a lot of the contemporary, very progressive theories that are used in psychology, and it's backed up by neuroscience, which is the brain science, and in therapies called ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. And it's a bit of a three-stage model, very broadly speaking. And the first is that we actually, we identify the thing, the mood state or the feeling, yeah? Dan Siegel coined this term Name it to tame it. Another way of putting it is label it to table it, like just put it out on the table, get it out there. And what the neuroscience tells us is when we do that, it actually takes the wind out of the sails of the mood state, like anxiety or the feeling. It just actually just takes it right down. It reduces the intensity. So identifying the feeling, like I'm feeling very overwhelmed right now. The worry monster's come in, anxiety's come in, it's trying to hijack. So naming the feeling and naming the process is just such a very simple and very, very powerful and effective strategy that I'd like to offer you right from the get-go. The second part of that process is to track it. Yeah. In psychology and psychotherapy, we talk a lot about tracking. And tracking can be something as simple as, okay, I feel like I'm feeling very panicked and overwhelmed right now. If 10 was the highest and 1 was the lowest, where am I on that scale? Or often with young people, I'd use a thermometer. Yeah, so if your feet was completely cold and the top of your head was like boiling 100 degrees, where is it? Yeah, so you can track it in terms of intensity. Another way of tracking is like, what's happening in my body right now? Where am I? Like, what's my body telling me? How's my body telling me that I'm anxious? And I'll talk in a moment about the stress response, and that always is the body giving us messages and what those messages are. Tracking is also having, in Buddhism, they call that holding the seat or sitting with, or in Western psychology, we talk about just developing some tolerance for the discomfort and for the pain. So not pushing it away, not trying to get rid of, because what we actually know is the more we fight it and try and get rid of it, the more it peaks, the more it exacerbates that. It's like adding fuel to a fire. The last part is what we call regulate, and all that really means is to calm it down. And regulating is the first two stages are actually already doing that. And then we also add some other things in, and I will be talking a little bit more about that. So we usually use the body, because anxiety is always experienced in the body. So we use the body to try and bring those stress experience and state down. And we want to breathe and ground ourselves. So we'll, in a moment, offer you some really good breath work. So that's one model that I wanted to share with you. Yeah.
Great model. Thank you. Yeah. Simple.
Yeah. Thank you, Nikki. So I use that all the time with my clients, and it's a really good reminder also for myself. Yeah, just to try and track and go, all right, well, you know, how am I relating to my anxiety at the moment? The other model I really want to share with you, just to help you make sense, you may have read in my bio that I'm very informed by neuroscience, which is the science of the brain. And of course, understanding a little bit about the brain and how, you know, what's activated in the brain, I find is very helpful as well. And I always share some of that with my clients, and I'd like to share that with you today. So this is, again, a very simple model of the brain. Very simple, hand-drawn by my son's textures that I found. So first and foremost, the brain, there's four main structures of the brain. Okay, I don't want to make this too complex. So the brain is developed in utero, and it develops from the ground up, so to speak, from the bottom up. So the first part of the brain to develop in utero is this here. It's called the brain stem. And it is responsible for basic survival functions like breathing and our heart rate and our basic reflexes and suckling. The next part to develop is the cerebellum, or the motor center. And you'll notice that, you know, how much that develops in the first year and 2 years of life, where a baby can, you know, can't even really hold its head up, and within a year it's holding a sippy cup, within 2 years it's running around. So the cerebellum has a huge development in those first few years. The next part of the brain to develop is called the limbic system, also known as the emotional brain. And often this part of the brain here is what we call the survival brain, okay? And that's the brain that's really critical to understand and work with when we're talking about anxiety. So you'll notice there's like an almond-shaped, and I have drawn it red for a reason, there's an almond-shaped structure in that brain, and it's two parts because the brain is bilateral, so it has two sides, but we're just looking at it from one side, and it's called the amygdala. When I talk about it to kids, I often call it the jumpy superhero. So that's something that's one way that you can think of it, yeah? It is a superhero and it plays such an important role in our survival, and we absolutely need it to survive. The thing with anxiety is it's too jumpy. It's a little oversensitive, yeah? Another way of describing it is it's like a smoke alarm. We need smoke alarms, right? My smoke alarm in the house is a little oversensitive. So if there's a lot of fog, it just goes off. Yeah, and that's kind of how some people's amygdala are. They're a little oversensitive. So they're quick to go into alarm mode. The good news is, this is not set in stone. The good news is that we can actually do some practices, mostly mindfulness practices, to just keep telling the amygdala, it's okay, it's a false alarm, thank you, good job, false alarm, it's okay. And there's a way that we can switch that off. The last part of the brain to develop is called the prefrontal cortex, and it's what we often call the smart brain. It's the thinking, organising brain. It's the brain that understands strategy and consequence, and it's the brain that actually calms, has the power to calm the emotional brain. So this is often called our survival brain down here, yeah? And it's what's often overactive, yeah, when we experience anxiety, particularly when we experience chronic anxiety. And at this point, I want to make a distinction. If people are experiencing, you know, acute anxiety and chronic anxiety that really isn't abating, that isn't, you know, calming, or they're not able to manage well, it may really be worth getting some sessions with a professional. Because one thing that can happen is when we talk about anxiety, it really, there's a key word there. To manage anxiety, what really everybody does is do something called avoid. So it's avoidance, okay? We avoid the thing that creates stress and fear in us, because that is the brain's way of trying to cope. The problem is that we can start developing well-established and strong patterns of avoidance, yeah? An example of that is when we start developing obsessive compulsive conditions like hand washing, where, you know, the idea of having germs on your hands brings your anxiety up so much that the only way to bring it down is washing hands, and actually that's a kind of avoidance. Or where we may have such chronic social phobia that we don't socialise or connect or engage because that's a way of managing our anxiety, but it, of course, then develops these patterns of avoidance, yeah? We generally avoid what we fear. So what can happen, and where this can really become a problem, is when people start developing these closed loops of avoidance. And you can see that in your life, you know, we can recognise that in their life, where people stop walking their dog because they're scared the dog might get attacked, or they don't drive in their car anymore because they're too afraid of having a car accident, or, you know, their life becomes small and much more limited, and it's actually an entrapment, yeah. And we call this closed loops and being trapped in your survival brain, yeah. This prefrontal cortex here is really where we thrive. We need to engage that brain. And so a lot of the work that I myself and my colleagues in psychotherapy do is we really try and shift people from their survival brain into their thriving brain. And what that means in life is that they don't just survive, they learn to love life and engage and thrive again. So that's something that I really want to point out to you. Now, there's a little structure right at the center. Actually, interestingly enough, it's right between our eyebrows. It's called the premedial cortex, I think. And it's a part of the brain that's engaged right in the center of our prefrontal cortex. And it has like a direct link, like a direct line to the amygdala, and has the power to switch it off. And we engage that when we practice mindfulness. So this is why mindfulness has become such an important tool in managing anxiety. Yeah. So I wanted to share that with you because it's actually a really important part of what we're really talking about. And of course, the brain isn't just in our head. Our whole nervous system travels throughout our body. So I'd like to offer you a mindfulness exercise right now. I invite you to join me in it.
Okay.
Yeah. So when we talk about mindfulness, what we're talking about is coming into the present moment and actually inhabiting this moment right now. When we have anxiety, it's usually future focused, and those types of thoughts often start with what ifs, what if, what if. And mindfulness can really help us just to center and ground ourselves again in the present moment. And we've all heard the old adage, come to your senses, yeah? So this is an exercise that I like to call come to your senses, yeah? And we use the sense of seeing in this exercise, and the sense of the body, of feeling and hearing, okay? So this is an exercise you can do quietly and talk to yourself quietly in your own mind. So I'm going to count you down, and I just invite you to join me. So to start with, I want you to keep your eyes open for this exercise. And to start with, I just want you to look around the room, wherever you are, and just quietly in your own mind, just name 5 things that you can see. And now I want you to quietly name 5 things that you can feel with your body. And they can be simple, like the glasses on your head, your feet on the ground. So just you sitting here. What can you feel? 5 things you can feel. And I want you to name 5 things you can hear. Sometimes that's a bit difficult, so you may just take a few deep breaths and see if you can hear yourself breathing. Now I want you to name 4 things you can see. They can be the same, they can be different. And 4 things you can feel, that you can sense. And 4 things you can hear. And 3 things you can see. 3 things you can feel. 3 things you can hear. And 2 things you can see. 2 things you can feel. 2 things you can hear. 1 thing you can see. 1 thing you can feel. 1 thing you can hear. And I'm curious, Nikki, because you're the only person that can talk back to me right now. How was that exercise for you?
It was great. I realised I was, you know, so intently listening earlier with my head, and it really brought me into my body. I feel my feet planted on the floor here, and can visually see some real anchor points around me, and I feel much more embodied in my body.
Fantastic.
Mm-hmm. And calm, actually, more calm.
More calm, yeah.
Mm.
And this is an exercise I give a lot to people who suffer, you know, acute anxiety, and also people with trauma. It's a very common exercise in trauma work.
Yeah.
Just because some people who are traumatized struggle with breathing and breath work, and this is often, sometimes we call this a safe self-hypnosis, because it really brings us back into a window, into a safe window, into a window of what we call a window of tolerance. And that's a bit of a segue, actually, for something I want to introduce you with. And it's a way of conceptualizing what can happen in our bodies and for us. And again, it's not just a model, it's actually something to help you really manage, and it's a great visual, I find. So I want to just very briefly talk to you about what happens in the body when we experience anxiety, yeah? And if it's acute or not, something happens in the body, something is activated in the body, and it's called our stress response, okay? So, and it activates a part of our nervous system. So very broadly speaking, there are two parts of our nervous system. One part is called the sympathetic nervous system, and that's the part that's actually activated when we are really stressed and really anxious, okay? And it puts us into fight, flight. And fight, flight actually, or freeze, or faint, they are the four responses that we have as humans, and animals have them as well, to manage a stressful situation. So that's one branch of the nervous system, and when that's activated, we notice our heart rate increases. We notice our breathing usually becomes short, sharp, and shallow. We notice our muscles tense, and usually it's around the neck and the shoulders. And often we even start taking on these types of postures, and you can often see it posturally in people as sort of collapsing. And often, you know, the vision becomes quite narrow, and people's hearing isn't good. They often get quite hot, they might get sweaty or have sweaty palms. And often people have tummy aches, or you know, sore, the gut doesn't feel right. And children often tell us that they have a tummy ache. So the blood flow is taken away from our digestive system and our inner organ, and it goes to our peripheries, because it's really designed to help us flight, like run really fast to escape a dangerous situation or a predator, or fight. So we have more strength and more power, and our body just activates us. It's just incredible how a survival mechanism operates. And we have, you know, particular hormones excreted, like like
Cortisol.
Cortisol is the main one, thank you, Nikki, and adrenaline. And that's really important. What happens is when we experience chronic anxiety, we then have this chronic excretion of these types of hormones that really aren't designed to be continually excreted, and it can actually create problems for our digestion and our inner organs. So the opposite, because there's always an opposite of that sympathetic nervous system, is what's called the parasympathetic nervous system, or the term I prefer is the rest and digest. So this is when we tell, our brains are told it's okay, things are safe, we can let go, the threat is over. And we have different chemicals, different hormones excreted, like dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin, and those really yummy hormones that help us relax and help us let go and enjoy life and be happy, basically. So often what can happen is some people can have a sympathetic dominance, yeah, which means they are in chronic stress response or threat mode. And that can actually really compromise someone's health, physical health. People are far more likely to develop a disease and they're compromised. Their mental health, their emotional health are compromised, and the immune system is really compromised. So what happens is when we are in that state, it's called a dysregulated state. And a dysregulated state can be either hyperarousal, which is what anxiety is, or often hypoarousal. So I have another model that I want to show you, and this is what's called the window of tolerance. Now, in the window of tolerance, it's kind of our window of tolerance or optimal functioning is where we manage quite well. We have ups and downs, you know, we have frustrations, we spill a carton of milk, we run out of coffee, we're late for work, all of that, but we still are able to manage. What happens is when often we move out of the window, and when we're in a state of anxiety, we're in a state of dysregulation where we're in hyperarousal and we're in fight-flight mode. And I've drawn a volcano here, because that's often what it feels like. You know, we're that level of aroused. Often what can happen is people can also go into what's called hypoarousal, and that's where they're very flat and under-vigilant, and they can dissociate or be frozen and numb. This is also a common trauma response, and I've drawn an iceberg here to sort of illustrate that that's often what that feels like. Yeah. So when we're hyper-aroused, we're over-vigilant, we're in constant fight-flight, and that's what a lot of the people watching would be experiencing. So I'll offer that to you just as a way of really conceptualizing what happens for us. And it also can be a good mindfulness tool. It can be a good mindfulness tool to ask yourself, am I in my window? Am I in my window? Where am I? No, I'm out of my window, and it's a really good prompt to ask yourself, what could I do right now, or what do I need to bring myself back into my window? Yeah. And I want to offer you another mindful moment here, Nikki.
Great.
And this is what I call a self-check-in, and it has become one of the best tools that I use on a daily basis, often not as much as I could. And I notice often what clients tell me, and my experience tells me, is that we can just get caught in the busyness of our day and our days, and it feels like we're just on this constant, you know, hamster wheel. And often we don't even realize how stressed and anxious we are until we go to bed at night. And then, of course, the busyness stops, the physical busyness, the practical busyness, but the busyness of the mind, it keeps going, the mind keeps going. And people often experience sleep disturbance and trouble shutting off, and their mind just keeps going. So one very, very helpful technique I have found is to build in breaks and pauses, or what I call mindful moments throughout the day. I recommend 3 particular times that I call the 3 T's. One is when you're having a cup of tea or coffee or whatever it is that you're having, but when you stop and have that drink, which is often just a natural pause, yeah. Another one is when you're on the toilet. There's often a time where it is your time, you're uninterrupted, and it's a time of just a moment of stillness. Depending where you live, in the city, this is a good one. I call it when you're in traffic, particularly when you're in traffic lights, and you need to pause, but that may be a bit more challenging for people that are in the country. Or if you're watching, you know, mainstream TV and there are actual ads, and then you mute the ads, yes, you can add another T in there if you like. And when you have your mindful moments, I would like you to try this, and let's try it now and just do a check-in, a self-check-in. Just acknowledge that I'm pressing pause right now. Yeah, and just scan your body from your head all the way down your face, your skull, your ears, your neck, your shoulders, your arms, your torso, your pelvis, your upper legs, your lower legs, all the way down to your feet. And feel your feet on the ground and just ask yourself, how am I doing right now? What am I doing? How am I feeling? And now you've just invited yourself to do a name it to tame it. Yeah? What can you name right now? How are you feeling? I'm feeling stressed and tired and overwhelmed. Name a few if you can, because we usually feel a cluster of things. And ask yourself, what do I need? And ask yourself, how can I support myself in this moment? And, you know, sometimes you might identify, I need a massage, and you can't get it right then and there, you know, but you might book one, or you might at least do some shoulder rolls, or just get up from the chair and move your body. How can I support myself? You might realise that you've been sitting on needing to go to the toilet for the last 20 minutes and you just haven't prioritised that. You're actually thirsty. You're actually allowing yourself to be uncomfortable and dehydrated because you're not attending. And attending to those most basic needs, they're the most important needs. And what this does is not only does it start introducing some pauses to this endless stream of busyness, which is very effective in and of itself, but it also starts a new pattern, or literally in the brain you start a neural pathway. And it's a pathway of pausing and interrupting the busyness, and it's also attending to yourself. And it's what we call practicing some self-care. And that is really the greatest antidote to anxiety and other mental health conditions that we experience. So I really encourage you to practice a number of those. Another really good one in terms of traffic is this is a good practice to do just as you're about to start the car, to drive to where you need to drive to, and as you've arrived at your destination, you turn it off, you're about to get out and go to the next thing. They're really good times to do those pauses as well. So I offer you the 3 T's. I offer you the self-checking. And what clients have told me and what I've found is that you no longer have this backlog by the end of the day. You've actually taken the pressure off throughout the day. And that's a very helpful strategy. So I just offer one breathing exercise, and it's actually the breathing exercise that's been studied to have the most benefit. So when we breathe, there's a nerve called the vagus nerve, and it goes from our brain right down to our bellies. And we want to activate that nerve. And in doing that, we want to actually, when we breathe in, do the Buddha belly breath. So imagine there's a balloon that's blown up. So we want to activate the diaphragm and have it push down and out and expand it. So the breath is called the 4-7-8. So I'll just mention it and then we'll finish up on this breath work. So we take a deep belly breath in for 4, and we hold it for the count of 7, and we breathe out through our mouth to the count of 8. And I'd like to invite you to do 2 rounds of this breath with me as we finish. Yeah, so take it. First of all, just take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. And take a deep belly breath in. 2, 3, 4, and hold. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and out. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Take a deep breath in. 2, 3, 4, and hold. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and out through your mouth. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Just like to remind you gently to connect with your breath. And I encourage you to just, regardless, to do that breath twice in the morning and twice at night before you go to bed. And any other time, it also really helps to put one hand on your heart and one on your belly. You can see that while you're doing that breath. I find that really, really helpful. And yeah, and I'd like to say thank you and much gratitude to you for putting on this amazing summit, Nikki, and to all the people watching. I'd like to just extend my gratitude and my well wishes to you, and my wish is that you feel safe and that you are happy and healthy and that you live a life with ease and practice some self-kindness and compassion for yourself.
Oh, Sabine, and thank you so much. That was just beautiful and gentle and so informative. So I really thank you for being with us. And if people want to make contact with you, they can have sessions with you over Skype or Zoom, and
they can look me up on Empatherapies.
Yeah.
And I do. I'm happy to offer a free 15-minute discovery call, and I offer Skype sessions or Zoom, actually, as you do, and telephone sessions. And I also have a practice in beautiful Maleny in the hinterland of the Sunshine Coast. So yeah, it's been an absolute delight and pleasure, Nikki. And my hope is that your beautiful listeners and people watching have gained something from this.
I'm sure they certainly will have. So thank